meeting to order. And Ann, could you just show for the record that all 7 commissioners are present? And before I turn this back over to the city manager, there are a number of different correspondence on the agenda today, and most of them are for one subject, which is the Jolly Trolley. And I just wanted to read something before we go into this. The subject of providing a shuttle service for residents and visitors as proposed by the owners of the Jolly Trolley and as discussed at previous commissioner meetings is off the table at this time and not included in the next year's fiscal year budget that will be presented today by the city manager. The commissioners will be devoting more time to this topic during the coming months as we have received additional information from other municipalities as to how best to provide improved transportation needs for our residents and visitors during the summer season. I just want to get that out first because I know there are probably a number of people in the audience that wanted to hear something about the Jolly Trolley. But that is off the table at this moment and not in this year's budget.
Mayor, just to be clear, it was never in the budget. It was all just a matter of discussion. Is that accurate? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And the other thing that I would add, Mayor, that I think is important for people to understand, because this often gets a little blown out of proportion, is that Jolly Trolley proposal was not our proposal up here. It was the Jolly Trolley proposal that came to us.
At our invitation.
Yeah. Well, anyone in the neighborhood that has a proposal that has any relationship to life in the city of Rehoboth Beach gets an opportunity to bring that proposal to us. But I think it's important that people understand we did not develop that proposal. It came to us from the Jolly Trolley folks.
I would just like that, and it's worth further conversation about it because it was specifically mentioned, a jitney service was specifically mentioned in the 2010 Comprehensive Development Plan. So it's not like this was just a new idea. You know, this is something that's been considered for about a decade.
Yeah, Steve, I'm actually glad you brought that up because, you know, this is one of the dangers of looking at parts of the CDP in a vacuum. Indeed, the jitney service was mentioned in there. It was also in the 2007 parking study that was done, and there's a whole section from the parking study that's excerpted in the 2010 CDP. But what the 2010 CDP didn't pick up on was the next paragraph of the parking study that wanted to combine a jitney service with also talking about residential-only permits. So there was a plan to kind of to marry the jitney service with reducing congestion in the neighborhoods. And that part didn't make it into the CDP. But the other thing that did make it into the CDP is that the theme throughout it is, and one of the most often quoted lines of that CDP is that the city will tolerate more people but not more cars. So the idea of the jitney service within the CDP was to have fewer cars in town, and that wasn't happening with the Jolly Trolley proposal, this particular one.
No, but my point is the concept in general
Yeah.
merits further conversation.
Yeah, in fact, I was going to ask that, Mayor, I was going to ask for clarification where you said it's off the table at this time. What is the plan going forward in terms of evaluating the concept?
Well, basically, more information from the Jolly Trolley people.
Okay.
But also, we've got some more information, as you've seen, from other
Yes.
municipalities.
Yes.
Just for the people in the audience perspective. Down in Florida, they have a service that's run in 15 different communities in South Florida. And most of the communities are small, like Rehoboth. A couple are larger. A couple are about the same size. And it's not a Jolly Trolley, but golf carts that hold anywhere from 6 to 10 people. And a couple of young gentlemen started this service in Florida, and apparently it's been very successful. So that was something that we found, and it's something to look into. But also, we've got more information on the trolley in Bethany as well. So I think it's more of looking into different ideas over the next year or so and seeing what might be the best thing for our community. One of the things that I've seen in Florida, because I tried this one a few times, And it's very good, and it's great for the residents and the rental homes that are in the communities, and much like we have in Rehoboth. And it's not so much to get cars off the streets as much as people that have cars in the neighborhoods not driving to downtown. So the way this system is set up, and again, we have more to look at, and hopefully we'll have somebody come in and make a presentation, is it's more of a people mover of the people that are in town, not people from out of town, or that are parking in the neighborhoods and then taking the jitney, because it just doesn't make sense from that perspective. Now, we'll, city manager.
Thank you. Good morning. First, I'd just like to draw your attention to the documents that we placed in front of you and those that we have on the outside table here for the public. The first one is the budget highlights page. On top, it says budget highlights page, and that sheet shows a balanced budget. It's important to remember that the budget process is fluid here. Since your last meeting on January 17th, the finance director is responsible for making modifications and changes as they come in. So for instance, we just this week found out that there will not be an increase to our insurance or medical insurance rates for employees. There could be 6 months down the road, but for right now, there is not an increase. So things like that we don't readily have available when we prepare the budget, items come in on a regular basis that Bert is responsible for making those modifications. The second item is the draft capital budget. That's the vertical page, I'll call it, of the CIP just for this year. And these show highlighted changes since our last meeting of January 17th, and we'll review them in detail with you. We also gave you the horizontal sheet of the 5-year CIP, which shows this year plus those items in future years. And then the munis sheets are for your budget binders. You can put them in because they were changed, so they're new. And finally, on the revenue side, we have prepared, based on your request, a tally of schedule of fees that are reflected in the various revenue items. You had requested that in the past, and we have that also for you. But if we can just turn to the draft capital budget on the vertical sheet, I'll call it, up top, draft capital budget, January 17th, to the changes you see in this budget now. The differences made since the last meeting, again, they're highlighted. Line number 1 is $30,000 added for convention center chairs. These are 350 chairs, new chairs, to replace 350 of the old ones, and 6 carts. Line number 5 shows a change from the original $640,000 for the Delaware Avenue restroom changes. That number is now $250,000, and the reason for that is our designer was not aware that we had made those spruce ups last year. So you'll recall that all restrooms were spruced up before the season started last summer, and the designer who looked into this for us was not aware. So that's the reason for the big change from $640,000 down to this number now, $250,000.
Sharon, is this a good time to ask questions as you go through this, or do you want to come back?
Yeah, if we can, I'm going to give you the list, and then we're going to project actually one by one what these changes are.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Line number 25, we added $50,000 for stormwater design for the area of Kent and Sussex Streets, and The Director of Public Works will explain that as we move into this. Line number 26 is an addition of $205,000 for LED retrofits on Rehoboth Avenue. These are just at the median. So we've talked about phasing in the LED lights on Rehoboth Avenue, and this is $205 for just the median lights. Line number 27 shows a $30,000 addition for 2 electric vehicle charging stations in the, I'll call it the municipal parking lot behind the fire department, and these will replace the original charging stations that were placed in 2014 at the Henlopen condos. These haven't been working very well in the last several years. They were put in a partnership with the University of Delaware, so these 2 charging stations would replace those 2. Line 72 shows $100,000 for the tot lot at Lake Gerard. This is to replace the tot lot equipment in kind, not changing the size of that playground, and the play equipment will be replaced in kind, and the playground area will be made accessible, which is a requirement. So that number has been reduced. If we can just, again, take some time. So really, you see some changes in this number for the draft capital budget, but we need to explain them on a one-by-one basis. So Kevin's here to do that.
The city manager already mentioned the, kind of keep the tot lot, we'll throw that up there, was rescoped back down to what you'd asked, I think, at 100,000 to replace the existing equipment. Kind of keep it within that same existing footprint. Talked about the convention center chairs. I think we have 30,000 in there to do a certain number of the chairs, and I think they're still stackable, still be able to hang on a rack and get them out of the way, and we think we have storage capability.
What percentages of that, of all of the chairs, how many chairs do we typically put out?
We have about 900 chairs total, maybe even closer to 1,000. We went, Commissioner Schlosser and who was there with us also? Commissioner Shanowski was there also, and we were able to actually look at the new chairs with Chuck Snyder, who places these chairs in a very systematic, engineered fashion. And the number that we came up with was 350 of the new chairs that could replace many of the old chairs that aren't really presentable right now. So that would at least give us an idea of the comfort level and if we can include that for future. So it's not replacing all of them.
Okay.
How many do we put out at a specific time? It varies, but as we said before, 6, maybe 8 maximum times of the year are we using all of the chairs.
Okay, and as far as the tot lot, my question on that was, we're replacing what's there. Are we doing anything with any type of ADA?
Yes. So just the accessibility will be there. So there will be a ramp in place to the entrance of the playground, and there'll be accessibility around the side getting there. Okay. And that's required.
And no trees are coming out, correct, since it's the same
Correct.
size? Is that right? Okay.
Thank you.
Next, we added the LED lighting. As you know, we have basically three sets of lights that we kind of operate and maintain. The boardwalk lights, top left, street lights, bottom left, and then the teardrop lights down the center median. We don't want to look at the boardwalk yet, just because we're in flux with all the small cell kind of issues with the poles out there. So the median, all of the median poles, we have an estimate in there of about $205,000 to replace all of those. That would be the teardrops and the arms that connect them. We would reuse the existing pole structures. Sharon mentioned the problems that we've had over the last several years on the electric charging stations down at kind of by the Henlopen condos. So in fact, within the last 10 days, I think we got feedback back that they couldn't be maintained anymore, that we're just kind of on our own to try to patch together what we could. So this would move 2 charging stations, which could charge a total of 4 cars at any given time, to the backside of our convention center parking lot behind the firehouse, and over by that electrical transformer, kind of out of the way, but 4 spots that could be used for that.
Kevin, can I ask you something? Is there some kind of grant availability because you're going green with something like this? If, for example, at some point in the future, we wanted to expand it to 2 different spots around town or something like that, in addition to this, if more people had electric?
I'll defer to my grant guy here to maybe weigh in. I know that we had looked at some.
Grant funding for this. So actually, a couple years ago, I know that Volkswagen came out with a grant opportunity. It was part of the mitigation for, I guess, misrepresenting emissions. I can look to see if that grant is still available, but so far that was the only one that I was familiar with.
No, I was just wondering, like, you see out at the Wawa, right at Route 9, there's like
Correct.
10 machines.
Sure.
Yeah, they're Tesla, they're
Tesla bought it,
specific.
yeah.
And I'm just wondering, one of these corporate things, not necessarily the state or something, but maybe one of these corporations would say, hey,
And I think the chair of our environmental committee might know some people to talk to.
Yeah.
Mr. Electricity.
thank you.
So sorry for the confusion on the Delaware Avenue restroom. That's totally my fault. Because we were just talking past each other, thinking we each understood what the scope was. So what we've come back with today is what our original recommendation was 2 new family restrooms. They're on the back deck of the existing facility. 2 new large changing rooms, and then several, 3, 4 smaller changing rooms. So the idea that 2 large changing rooms, obviously families could wheel in, take care of a bunch of folks at one time. And then the other ones for just individuals want to get changed, they can. So 2 family restrooms, 2 family changing rooms, and I think it's 4 smaller changing rooms.
I think one of the things I would mention, as far as the changing rooms are concerned, because we've had issues with people changing their clothes at the showers, is the little bit of signage telling with the location of the changing room, so we don't have people holding up towels and changing on the boardwalk.
Right.
And Kevin, does this also include construction out onto Delaware Avenue? Or is this the footprint that exists?
It's existing footprint. You can see the existing footprint of the main building now. So let's see if I can get that scroll. Yeah, okay, so this is the existing footprint
okay.
where the cursor is. So this deck gets extended to the back, almost to the curb line. So it'll grow toward the back. And I think before we had kind of the elevation view of that from each of the signs.
We'd probably end up losing a couple parking spaces.
No, because it's within the land area of the existing.
Oh, there doesn't have to be some kind of a turnaround spot for,
No. So we've got the hydrant back there too. So we've got a no parking at the street end already because of the hydrant and the fire zone. So
Kevin, just to clarify that all of these new spaces, these family accessible, family assistance rooms are wheelchair accessible and handicapped accessible to get in.
the
and
4
out of.
are the 2
Yes.
family changing rooms and the 2 family restrooms. And then just briefly on the Stormwater Basin 40, which we've had some discussions about, not having a stormwater infrastructure there. So we got our feasibility study back from the consultant earlier this month with a preferred route. So what his preferred alternative is to construct storm drain infrastructure along 4th Street and then take it from there down Sussex Street, where ultimately it would tie into the 3rd Street storm sewer discharging into Lake Girard. Now that we had this preferred route, we understand if you're going to dig up the street, we want to look at the other infrastructure in that street and do it at the same time if we need to. We know we need to do the water main on Sussex. It's an old 4-inch line that we would very much like to replace. We don't know about the sewer line. We haven't had a lot of problems over there, but we want to video that just to make sure before we would tear the street up. And we don't want to tear it up 3 times to do something. If we're going to do it, we want to do it all at one time. So because of the costs of all that, we figured that we'd try to break this into 2, maybe you have to start at this end. So start at Sussex and do that maybe as phase 1, and then the second phase would be to tie the drains down, the new drains down 4th Street down to the new drain at Sussex to take care of that area. Much larger than, we had originally anticipated, but we were only looking at the stormwater infrastructure. But I can't recommend doing that alone without doing the other infrastructure that would need to be done at the same time. So we put $50,000 in this budget year to take the feasibility study to design so we can work out better cost estimates, make sure all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted with respect to the phasing and with respect to the capacity out there. But that's the preferred alternative from our consultant. And then we would look at phase 1, again, Sussex. We know we have to do the stormwater. We know we have to do the water main. To be determined on the sewer once we get a chance to video that and see. And then resurfacing one time. And then phase 2, we know our water main's good out there. We would just, again, need to video the sewer to make sure that it's okay.
Is phase 2 what's on here for 2022? Or is
Our
it,
fiscal years, we have $50,000 in fiscal
Saw
year
that.
21 for this year. 22 would be phase 1, which would be the Sussex Street piece of that.
Okay.
And then the following year would be phase 2.
that's a lot, 830,000?
It is.
Yeah.
So that number from 210 to 830, that's why we need the 50,000
yeah,
in
I
for
see that.
design to then move further. 'cause
And it's
we
even
have
another 600 after that. So it's really 1.4 million.
It's an estimate.
Yeah, right.
So,
Still.
and there are, we estimate each one kind of individually. We know there are cost savings, do them all at the same time, one whole street. But we wanted to at least get the number out there on the high side that, we could all kind of look at and set. So the design we would get, have it ready to go if commissioners want to proceed with that the following year. Obviously, we do water mains each year. We have sewer rehab in our wastewater fund. So however we want to work that to piece it together into, one viable project, I think is probably the way to go. And I think that's it for the changes.
There was a question, Walter, and I'm assuming it's about the Delaware restrooms. Yes, sir.
Good morning, Walter Birmingham, 123 Hennepin Avenue. Delaware Avenue restroom. Historical information, years ago when we redid Baltimore Avenue restroom, had to come back in. There were significant price changes because it was not a case of pouring and putting, it had to be piling. The proposal here is is to add to the back of the building,
It's extending the deck out to the back of the building.
the deck out.
Correct.
But it's going to be in the floodplain and it's going to have to be supported.
Okay.
Is it an examination of an estimated price on expanding the building or its substructure also? Because we were shocked years ago when we did it, but we were started. It needed to be done. This needs to be done, and I would suggest you be sure that it's going to the underground structure necessary to support it. And the other question, and I'm just being blunt, the drainage. A couple weeks ago, we had significant rain, and I do not disagree with the improvements about not doing the improvements for 4th Street and Sussex, et cetera. And you've got the right approach to looking at the water, sewer, et cetera. But I also see in there doesn't include Dover Street. And our champion of Dover Street is not standing up, and her name is in Dover Street, per se, is not listed on this project because that's what it's about. It's about part of it. Commissioner Schlossler, I'm talking about your street. It does not
It's not
appear
my
in the
street.
description.
Let me clarify.
No,
I have
no, I'm-
never asked for anything specific for my street in public.
I'm
And
addressing-
I want this miscommunication and these misfacts taken back. I have asked for Sussex, for Kent, and 4th Street to be addressed. There are no known issues on Dover Street, nor did I specifically ask for my street to be addressed. I asked the public to please look at the facts. And Kevin, you know darn well that's also what I have asked for. The problems are on Sussex and 4th and Kent, and I request that facts be correct here and not things that I'm asking for something specific for my street, because I never have.
Correct. I think that's absolutely correct. And you never asked me to look at Dover Street. We looked at it from a stormwater basin perspective. And you can, we've seen that map that I've brought down before that shows the outline of each of the stormwater basins within the city. So we looked at that whole stormwater basin 40 holistically to see where the infrastructure would need to go. So it benefits that entire stormwater basin. It does not particularly benefit one street. In fact, one street's, going to pay a heavy price for the infrastructure that goes in. I mean, Sussex.
And I appreciate you taking the
And
time
we
to
don't
do
typically
this
have a lot of
right.
standing water on
Thank you.
Sussex, but in order to get the rest of the basin
Yes.
drained in a timely manner, it'll impact the residents on Sussex.
I appreciate you doing the research. I was looking back on some of the history of this and some of the comments just brought up, and I think you've addressed it very well. And I do appreciate you taking the time to do that and do it in a correct manner for the entire community.
All right, thank you. I'm Stan Mills, Chair of the Beach and Boardwalk Committee, and I'd like to address the restroom improvement thing. My recollection from the last meeting is that that exact floor plan was presented, and of course, $640,000. That floor plan was 2 family restrooms, 2 family changing rooms, big size changing rooms, and 4 of the standard changing rooms. My recollection out of that meeting was that it was primarily because of the exorbitant price to do that, is that we were to look into 4 family restrooms and no changing rooms. That's my recollection. And based on that, I took it back to the Beach and Boardwalk Committee, and we had a discussion. I'd like to share some of that with you. First we started off with participation via phone with former Commissioner Jay Legree and I making a comment that in our tour of 20 boardwalk towns in New Jersey, we relayed to the committee that pretty much every boardwalk town we went to had family restrooms now, or gender-neutral restrooms, whatever, but they're big enough for family units to get in there. And as well as many had changing rooms in there, and they were just little small things, anywhere from a plywood box on the beach that you would get in and with a bench there to change, or a room in the facility. So we started off with that. Now we found out that, and we said to the committee that there's no magic formula on how many family restrooms there are and how many changing rooms there are. What we found is that there were at least in each building, at least 1, 2, occasionally 3 family restrooms in it, but there's no magic formula for that or the changing restrooms. What we did find, though, is a lot of those towns, maybe they had fewer family restrooms in a building, but they had much greater number of restroom facilities along the length of their boardwalk. So again, there's no magic formula. Based again on my conveying to the committee that this board had said, oh, let's try to get the price down. Let's look at 4 family restrooms and no changing rooms. The committee had a discussion, and they indicated that the 4 family restrooms was good, but that you absolutely needed at least a few changing rooms. And the reason was that otherwise people are going to be going into the family restrooms or regular restrooms. And we did not believe, the committee did not believe, that the city should be in the business of directing anybody to change clothes into a family restroom. The family restroom, that would potentially create lines. And when you gotta go, you gotta go. You don't want to be in line behind 2 groups that are waiting to change their clothes in a family restroom. So I'm pleased to say, it looks like perhaps you all are in agreement with going back to this, which was the original one thrown out, over the 4 family restrooms and no changing rooms. And we applaud that there are going to be changing rooms. But we also asked for consideration that 3 or 4 family restrooms might be the optimum number there, and seems to fit in your budget. We also looked at all this, being mindful that of the totality of the number of family restrooms in the changing rooms in the town in future year, being mindful that there's still plans in the, being put forward for modifications to the Baltimore Avenue restrooms. And I think there's just one family restroom there, and I see that a second one, I believe, can be squeezed in. So that's all going to be tweaked. Why that's so important is family restroom or restrooms, plural, at Baltimore, and a family changing room and maybe a few smaller changing rooms. Why that's so important is because the Delaware Avenue restrooms will not be year-round restrooms for family restrooms. So we will still be deficient in year-round use of family restrooms until we build those at Baltimore, because what I understand is the Baltimore Avenue facility will have year-round at least family restrooms there. So to end with that, would also recommend that if at all possible, to put funds in this year for the design of that Baltimore Avenue restroom facility for continuity's sake. Yes, it won't be built for another year after the Delaware Avenue, but at least it would be realized the following year, not 2 years later. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sharon, wasn't there some kind of a design done on Baltimore? Or was that just for the updates, like last year, the year before?
They did a concept design, Mayor, to see
Preliminary.
what could be done out there.
We have something.
Correct, to start from, right. Mhm.
Thank you. Back to you.
So the one also addition that I'd like to request before the outcome of this meeting is permission from the commissioners to advance the Luke Cosmo pay stations for next year. We did this last year in this year's budget so we could get them ordered and placed. So this is phase 2. That is in the budget. You've seen that from the very beginning. We do have plans to install phase 2 Luke Cosmo pay stations in those other areas that we did mention before. So I would just request from the commissioners at the end, before the end of the meeting or now, to grant us the opportunity to proceed so we can get them ordered and installed by May.
And this is what we did last year,
Correct.
and it's the same kind of thing. These things would be installed by Memorial Day weekend.
Correct.
Just like last year.
Hopefully, you know, they won't come in damaged like they did last year, and you know, but we got it done. That was the big thing. So.
And this is a smaller number. Does that mean just a smaller number of stations as well?
Yeah, there's 2 less than last year. And part of the intention of trying to get them ordered now is that once we know for sure that we will be ordering the pay stations, we can have Bill Maffei start to take down the existing poles, because that was a big confusion last year. We were tight with time from the delivery to actual installation and implementation. So this year, you know, if we go ahead and have the heads up and approval early, we can go ahead and start that process.
And where would these be located?
These are located 2 blocks north of the existing one, so that would be along, let me just zoom in here, Olive Avenue, as well as parts of, I believe it's Virginia Avenue as well. And then south, it would be expanding down towards Laurel Street and ending at Hickman, not going north or west of First Street.
So would that take care of pretty much everything
That-
east of First?
Yes.
Except for around
Yep.
the Henlopen?
Yep.
Or does it take care
Correct.
of around the Henlopen as well?
Not the Henlopen just yet, because we had a couple projects. So we have the Lake Gerard master plan. We were unsure about where that is going at this point. It also includes, well, phase 3 will also include Lake Avenue. We wanted to avoid that area because of Lake Avenue phase 2 project. We didn't want to put pay stations in and then have them taken out and put back in after the project, so.
But it would go south all the way to Hickman.
Correct.
Mayor, do we need a motion to move this ahead?
Well, I don't know that we can actually vote on this because it's not on the agenda to a vote, but it's really a consensus to give the city manager.
So we don't have to vote on it? Oh,
No, but we need to get to consensus to give her the opportunity to go forward.
I agree.
yeah.
And also, so you know, we're not paying for these until after April 1, so after the budget is adopted.
Right, you just
That they know that we're partnering, T2 knows that we're partnering with them as we did last year, and they're just advancing that, that order, if you will, to get those 46 pay stations in.
I think it's a very good idea. I mean, it only makes sense that we're prepared for the Memorial Day weekend.
Yes,
Yeah, I'm in agreement.
Yeah.
okay.
Anybody
Thank
else? Anything? So,
Yeah.
you got it.
Got a question?
Yes, Walter.
Are we talking about line 32?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So if we're taking them from Hennepin Condo and we're going to move them someplace else in Ocean Blocks, is that what you're talking about?
It's going to be east of First Street from Hickman up to Virginia.
I'm just asking the question, and I gather you've done your research. So I am familiar with the work that was done on them when the people came down from the University of Delaware that were taking care of them at no cost to the city, and they have appeared to have been well used. But are we looking at something that's been well proven in the Ocean Block?
I believe he's talking about the electric vehicle charging stations, not the
You're talking about,
parking.
no, you're talking about line 32, which is parking for the pay stations,
Yes, sir.
not the electric charging stations. Right?
Which sheet, are you looking at this sheet? The horizontal?
On a different
Oh,
sheet.
the vertical.
My apologies. So now you're talking about charging stations.
No.
No. I
No,
thought
okay,
that's-
he's talking about.
Yeah, basically, last year, we put in these type of stations along
This is
Baltimore,
Pay your meter. Pay the meter.
the kiosk.
And have they worked out well? Do they have a good test record
Yes, absolutely.
thus far? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. So back to you, Sharon.
So they are the changes that we made. Again, we go back to a balanced budget. I, would offer, please, any questions or concerns that you might have. This is the third meeting. We did skip one, and we have one more budget meeting before your March workshop, and then another planned budget meeting before your regular meeting in March, and then the budget is hopefully set to be adopted at your regular meeting on March 20th.
I have a couple questions. Thank you, Kevin, for taking the time. Walter, I apologize for getting upset with you, but it's, I just like facts to be out there. So I do appreciate the work you've done on the stormwater basin, as do, I'm sure, the residents of Kent and Forth and others. So thank you. Sharon, at our last meeting, there was I believe it was our last meeting, there was a consensus among the commissioners that we would like to see both the convention center chairs and the AV included in this year's, and AV improvements included in this year's budget based on the presentation that was given. And we asked that the trade-offs that be considered for that investment not be stormwater specifically or anything else that's absolutely critical infrastructure, but that we asked that we do look at some of the the equipment and other things as trade-offs to make that investment in a revenue-producing, or not revenue-producing, but at least an expense offsetting initiatives such as the convention center. So I noticed that there were 0 changes or reductions in all the equipment. And then we also didn't include in there the convention center AV, where there was consensus from the commissioners. So can you talk me through that decision-making process, please?
Certainly. Again, the budget is fluid, and going back to each department and mainly in the Public Works Department with the equipment, which I think is what you're referring to, there was just not any movement there to trade off for the audio system in the convention center. In other words, there was nothing that we were able to give up, if you will, for next year, and we did look at it. So I don't know, Kevin, if you want to explain that a little further. I mean, there was nothing there. We looked at it one by one. Kevin met with his department heads, and again, it was a trade-off. What we did put in there are the Rehoboth Avenue LEDs.
No, that was great,
For
thank you, yeah.
205,000, certainly.
Okay, so
you
maybe
can-
that was the trade-off, is you decided to put that in as a priority over.
Just as a, what's a balance, what's, you know, more preferable, at least from staff standpoint? Is it more important to put in the LEDs or, you know, something else? You certainly, that's what this is for. This is just my presentation to you. If you'd like to remove them and move things around, that's fine.
Commissioner, can I ask a question that you would probably know? Are most people bringing in their own AV equipment, or are they utilizing?
Well, there's several layers of technology that contribute to the experience in the convention center. So there's your core connectivity that's in there all the time that's fixed, okay? So your wireless connections, your connections to your HD monitors, to your sound system. So that infrastructure is set. What typically happens is that, you know, folks that rent the convention center then bring in the equipment that sits on top of that infrastructure. So, so what I'm recommending is that first layer of infrastructure that's fixed, that's provided by the city, that is the foundation for other equipment to be plugged in on top of it, be improved so that there can be an optimal experience at that next layer when others bring in their equipment. Does that answer the question?
Yep, thank you.
Okay.
So, again, it's a trade-off as to what the commissioners feel is you know, most necessary. All we did was look at the equipment that was requested, and as far as the equipment to service the city at the same level that we're used to doing that, we could not remove any of that because of damaged equipment or you know, other areas that we did look at them one by one. So if you want, if it's the desire of the commissioners to remove that 205,000 to replace, I think the AV was 112,000, or we could do less on the median, the LEDs, and also add the 112,000 for the audio, that's certainly up to you.
Personally, I think the LEDs are a higher priority. That isn't where I would do the trade-off, but I do think those are definitely a higher priority, and I'm glad you added those in.
I remember
quite
your
frankly.
first year, you were like, can we get these?
Yeah,
Because they
no,
look
I
bad."
think it's,
Yeah.
and plus
I'm
the
glad to
energy
see.
savings and environmental kind of benefits of those, I think, are make it worthwhile. So I appreciate adding that back in. And I know there's other initiatives that we want to talk about, so I'll defer any other discussion on this and the AV as a priority until we're done with those other discussions as well. Thank you.
Before we dive into specific individual items in the budget, I've got some high-level questions for the city manager. In looking at the budget highlights from the version that was January 15th to the current version that you provided today, I noticed some significant changes. And I'll just list them out, and if you could just follow up with, I guess, a couple explanations.
Excuse me, Commissioner, I'm sorry, are you looking at this sheet?
No, I'm looking at the budget highlights
Okay,
that
great,
has
got it.
the overall
Okay.
budget. So general revenue went up $60,000. Water revenue went up $20,000. Wastewater decreased by $654,000 and change, which ended up being a total decrease in revenue by just over $500,000. And then in the general fund operating budgets, you said that some things were cut, like insurance increases and things, but the general operating budget expenses actually went up $41,000. On the flip side of the wastewater revenue coming down, the wastewater fund operating expenses came down by $335,000 and change. if you, or Kevin can maybe just explain a few of those things, I think would be helpful.
Okay, so actually, I'm going to hand this out to you. Bert has prepared a sheet of budget modifications for you, so we can go over these one by one if you'd like to look at that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think this will address the concerns.
Yeah, not concerns as much as just questions. Thank you.
Gave me two. Is it two separate sheets or just one,
Just one.
No, it's just one, sorry if I gave you two.
in case somebody needs?
Do we put one up so people could see it, or do that?
I don't know if we can project that. I don't have a slide for it, but I gave them out. So.
Okay, okay.
Bert, do you want to, look at that one by one? Or however the commissioners like to do it?
Yeah, most of the changes were in the expense side in the general fund. But just looking at the top, I mean, basically, I'm giving you the number that we started with on January the 17th. And the items that resulted in the change were, we have money in the tree preservation fund that we collect. People want to remove trees. There's a mitigation fee. So we actually have cash set aside for that. So that $15,000 is shown as revenue, and it's also shown as an expense item. So all we're really doing is using money that we've already set aside. The Silver Lakes evaluation, $50,000, that's just new information that came in. And I don't know whether you want me to go down all these items, because most of these changes were in the expense side, and some of them were very small. But I think if you really wanted to say, well, what were the big items that drove the changes? I mean, you've got the LED lighting for $205,000. You've got a change in the capital outlays for the comfort stations. It declined from 640 to 250. Tot lot reconfiguration went from 250 to 100,000. And then basically, those are pretty much the major changes. There was an adjustment to the contingency, and that basically, we brought that from 277,000 to 209,000. Our history on the contingency, I mean, typically in years past, we had maybe 100,000. And last few years, we had a lot of moving parts, so we had a higher contingency. But we feel that the 209,000 is an adequate contingency. Probably the next big item that you asked about in the water fund, I'm sorry, the wastewater fund. You see that $654,000 change. Well, most of that resulted from a change in the loan fees. We have a loan with the DNREC for the outfall project, and it wasn't fully drawn. So we had to kind of put our heads together to see how we could take advantage of that money, because there were restrictions on it. So there was basically, we had out-of-pocket paid for engineering fees prior to the beginning of the project. And those engineering fees, we thought, well, rather than let that loan not be fully drawn, we reimbursed ourselves. And so that's why you see the 1.599590. That's coming from DNREC.
So we reimbursed ourselves from a loan at what interest rate?
2%. Well, see, the loan for the outfall was over $40 million. We still have money left over to draw. Well, we've got projects coming down the road, so we could let that money expire and just tell DNREC, well, stop, we'll amortize the loan. But that money was available to us at 2%, and if you want to let it expire, that just means that you'll have to have another source of revenue when you get the 2023 period, when you're going to do the $11.5 million worth of improvements that GHD's recommended. So what the plan is for that money that we're going to get is I'm going to set it aside in a CD. And I'm not going to spend it on anything because I'm going to need it for a future project. So what that really accomplishes, it reduces the amount of increases in rates that we would have to put in place in that 2023 to 2026 period. So
So the wastewater rates will decrease for
well,
this
there's gonna be
upcoming
an
year.
Won't increase as much.
They won't increase as much.
Okay, okay.
So that's a benefit to the residents.
Yeah.
I think it is. I think when you get 2% money and essentially you, I don't think it's a bad thing to do.
Okay. You answered all of my questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Bert, that's helpful.
I have a couple of clarification points were you done, Edward? I'm sorry. Were you done for now?
On this
Oh, okay.
topic, yeah.
I'll jump in when you're done then.
No, I'm done on this.
I just wanted to clarify a couple things that I read all the correspondence from the public, and as you can tell, I'm a little frustrated with correct facts not getting out. So I just wanted to correct a couple facts here in public. One, there seems to be something, some notion that there's going to be or we're considering a stormwater surcharge or something. I don't recall that being discussed, it being brought to the table, or ever included in the budget. So can you just kind of clarify that for me? It's not in the budget as far as I know. It's not something on the table that we're even discussing. So can you just clarify that point? I'm just on this theme of making sure the correct facts are being effectively communicated. So if you don't mind addressing that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, so I did mention a possible stormwater impact fee in the future. There is nothing in this budget, but it was part of my, discussion or presentation to the commissioners that
Okay.
other communities have that, and it's something because we're paying for, all the stormwater enhancements, that there could be a fee in the future.
Okay, but it's
There's
not
nothing.
something on the table here, commissioners, that we're considering, and it's certainly not in the budget. It's certainly not something we're considering for this year at this point, correct?
Well, there's $50,000 for a feasibility
Right.
study to look at that,
Overall.
as you see on your vertical sheet here.
Yes.
But nothing that would impose a impact fee in the immediate future.
Yeah.
So what we've been doing is studying with, this week with GHD, our experts in the engineering field, to come up with stormwater enhancements and improvements that we need to make. One of them is you'll recall, the grease trap ordinance. So that's coming to you in the next, hopefully in the next couple of months. If we provide all this, and of course, we have other studies being done with resilient communities and everything else with that. So there's quite a fee for that. If we want to improve our stormwater, not just Kent, Sussex, and you know, the areas that we're looking at, it's throughout the community, you know, what do we have to do? So
No,
that's all.
and I appreciate you taking the longer view on this rather than just continue, or we've been in the process over the past decade of just one-off kind of tactical solutions. And I really appreciate the longer view that I know you'll make that study public and we'll have a lot of discussions about it. So thank you
Part of that
for
feasibility study, Commissioner, does include quite a bit of stakeholder participation and input.
Yes,
So
of course.
The plan is to have
Yes,
a
thank
group
you.
looking at it, right?
absolutely right.
Okay.
So, and we'll reach out to the appropriate
I
stakeholder
just
groups.
encourage you, make it public, invite people to
absolutely.
participate
Assuming you
in
will.
it, and I know you will, so thank you for that clarification.
Yes.
The second one was, and I know Kevin, I had concerns about this, and I thought you answered it very well. We have discussed looking at Lake Gerard and having a plan for Lake Gerard. And I expressed concern in a couple of our meetings that it kept getting deferred, and you had an excellent response as to why the Lake Gerard, maintenance and such is being deferred. Could you please repeat that again for everybody?
Sure. It's been on the books in the plan stages for many years, certainly before I got here. That was one of the things we saw. But we knew the Lake Avenue Streetscape project was about to happen, and that's going to cause a lot of disturbance right in that area. So we want to get that infrastructure completed before we then address that western prong of Lake Gerard, which is, as you know, silting in. So
Okay,
I
and
didn't,
so-
didn't think it would be wise to do that,
I
then
think
do all
it's
the
smart.
construction. It would fill right back.
And we all agreed with that recommendation from you, and I know you pushed it out, some of the Lake Gerard funding and analysis to next year's budget, and I saw that in the capital plan at one point. I think it's still in there. So I think I may think of more things through the correspondence. I'm just reviewing it too. But I think those are two questions I've seen come up in more than one piece of correspondence. So thank you for clarifying that, both of you. I appreciate it.
And I'm assuming your question's about the stormwater impact fee? Okay, could you wait on that until we're finished talking about it, please? Thank you.
Thanks.
Do you have something on the stormwater impact?
Bunky, you need to come up here.
Start all over, please.
Funky Market, 520 Newcastle Street. I just had a question regarding the discussions relative to the change out of the to the LED lighting. It's been mentioned at least that there would be, and I would assume, a utility cost savings as a result of that. Has that been quantified, or would it be worthy to note the potential savings with regard to that?
One of the things that I'd add is, so back when we were initially getting quotes for the LED retrofits, we were estimating from the vendor approximately a 56% power savings for those teardrop fixtures. As you see in the city manager's report every month, most of the electric is paid for from municipal street aid. So I think in combination of having a 56% savings in electricity, as well as I'm sure you're all familiar, the $4 million increase in municipal street aid this year in the bond bill, that could potentially free up a lot of money that could go towards other infrastructure projects as well.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you, Evan. Did you have a question on what we've discussed already?
May I? May I?
Mm-hmm.
I'm Jay LeGreen. I still live on Prospect Street. There is way to go on the Kenton and Sussex stormwater project. That's great. However, Commissioner Gay brought up that it comes around to about 1.4 million bucks, and that's just one little segment of our stormwater problems in this town. We have Bayard, we have Scarborough, we have 2 lakes that need stormwater maintenance. We have great reports from Lita Bennett when she gave her engineering report. We're doing well. But I think the impact fees coming, we should do that. And I think we should think about an overall holistic stormwater plan for this town. And now's a good time to start thinking about what we're looking at down the road. And I think the public needs to know that somewhere down here we're gonna have to start paying for stormwater projects.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And just so that you are aware, the commissioners and the public, that's what we're doing. So we're looking at one little segment, but we're also looking overall. That's why we have a Director of Public Works. That's why, that position is so needed here. Because there are projects within this 1 mile community where we live and where we work that needs to be addressed. So we're doing that systematically, methodically, and next year you're going to see another project coming through, not only Sussex and Kent, but
Byard's on there, I think, for next.
the south side. And also, that's why I brought last year the 2 engineers in that we deal with all the time, Bob Palmer on the for the south side of town, and then we have Kircher Engineering, who in the past was doing the other side. So we're all now working together with the Director of Public Works. Thank you.
This is on stormwater? Yeah, it is. Please come up there. Well, again, that's in the future, that's not today.
Well,
Again,
okay, it is on the stormwater repairs infrastructure. Suzanne Good, 1 Grove Street. I'm looking at this, I'm hoping to more holistically, that we're a small town, we face massive infrastructure repair costs. I actually had more conservative numbers that I had been told earlier, more like maybe $500,000 for stormwater. I'm hearing 1.4 million. We're not like the federal government where we can just print money. It does come from the tax base. So I don't understand, just more globally, why you all didn't, to my disappointment, not go ahead with 279,000 in signs in a town of 1 square mile. So I'd like
Okay,
to
please, you're getting off
and
subject.
in addition to the stormwater, there are upgrades to the wastewater treatment plant, which is probably the most important building in this entire town. So I'd like to see some fiscal restraint, and I'd like all of the stormwater work to be done as like a top priority, but without an impact fee levied, assessed, whatever you want to call it, on residents who are, not all, we didn't inherit our home from like parents. I think you have an attitude that everybody here like inherited wealth or something. We work for our money. I have to put my last and 4th child through college beginning in September. So please give some thought to dealing with the infrastructure, but that everything else should be considered discretionary and should be deferred in this town for a few years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Were there any other?
I think Walter has a
Walter
question.
Birmingham, 123 Hendopen Avenue. A simple question about the LED lighting. Is that the standards also? I've heard conversation, but the standards will stay the same and the
Correct.
tenant.
It's just
Just be new tenons on the top.
the arms and the device and the teardrop
Thank you
devices
very
themselves.
much.
Back to you, Sharon. Any other?
I have just a couple. Sharon, I noticed some of the increases, I'm sorry, not increases, but I think they were actually minor decreases in the auto leases on the budget modification listed. And as I've gone through the entire budget, department by department, we spend quite a bit of money on auto insurance and auto leases. Have we thought of any way to have some sort of motor pool where every department and every employee isn't having their own vehicle, but we're using some sort of efficient auto pool, which could save us some money as well?
So to address the enterprise leases, some of that information, again, we just got in. So Evan was able to put these figures in. That's why you didn't see them before. As far as a motor pool, I think Commissioner Schlosser brought that up several years ago. Yes, we have looked at it. It's difficult at best with everyone doing the work that they do. So we have, I'll say right now, 3 individuals in the building and licensing department who rotate and are out in the field for the most part. One individual rides his bicycle because there is no vehicle, but he prefers to ride his bicycle around town, especially in the summer, going from one inspection to another. We certainly have, the minimum amount of vehicles in the police department that I think are, and the chief also would say that are required for police officers. We rotate those vehicles out on a annual basis, 2 1 year, 1 the next year, and replacing those vehicles. We looked at efficiency, energy savings vehicles, but it's not always practical for the police department. The Public Works Department, that's, again, we need the number of trash trucks that we have, and the amount of equipment that we have, again, to provide the level of service that we do on a regular basis. So it's something that we have looked at in the past. We'll continue to look at it, sharing. We have 2 guys going out in 1 vehicle at times. That's not always efficient. Sometimes it's needed. That's the best that I can say. And some employees use their own vehicles.
Okay. I just a question to see if it had been looked at in the past.
Yeah, as far as insurance, I can tell you we look at that on an annual basis, and we have some savings over the past 3 years in changing not our brokerage insurance folks, but our insurance company itself. So they were able to provide additional savings we had them separated out in the past, and now we're under one umbrella with one insurance company.
Sharon, just real quick on the leasing. I think 2 years ago we went to leasing versus purchasing, and we anticipated pretty nice, and this is just Edwardson background, I think we anticipated pretty nice savings from that. Has that come to fruition, and do you know that kind of offhand? I see, Evan, that was a really great initiative.
Yeah, one of the things that Enterprise had done was sort of an analysis to see what our current fleet, the age of our current fleet, and the cost that's associated with maintaining that current fleet. So right now we've replaced approximately, or will be replacing, a total of 25 vehicles. So these are all Enterprise leased vehicles. They've replaced an older fleet, and at this point, I think we'll start to see it. They admit that it takes a couple years to see the cost savings because you have to get that old fleet sort of out of service. And we've done that. I mean, we've replaced vehicles from, the 90s and from 2000. So we're just now getting to the point where we have vehicles that are maybe at the oldest, at 2010. So we're just, with this next round upcoming this fiscal year, essentially all of our older fleet will be put up for sale in the auction. And obviously that's revenue back to the city as well. Once we replace these vehicles, they're put into auction and they're sold. So,
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing it up, because is it
good initiative.
We're going into the 3rd year?
Yeah.
yes, 3rd year.
Yeah, so, and maybe the majority of the commissioners here weren't here for that presentation 3 years ago. So that did save a considerable amount of money. We also have, I'll say, just a very much improved, wonderful maintenance staff who look at our vehicles. We have our own shop here for heavy equipment, smaller equipment, small tools, and under the current supervisor, not to dissuade any of the work that the former folks were doing, but we're saving money, we're being more efficient, and we're getting our repairs done quicker and with precision.
I have a sort of a general question that's not even immediate. When we approve the budget this year for the capital, we're only approving this next fiscal year's, right? So the 5-year capital improvement plan is basically just for our information or for planning ahead. But I can't help but notice that the following fiscal year, and I'm just looking at the general fund, not the enterprise fund, because that's taken care of by the water and wastewater rates, right? That the general fund increase in projected capital expenses for 2022 is almost 1.2 million more than in 2021. where do we think we're getting that revenue from?
Well, again, we started the 5-year capital improvement plan a few years ago now, and this is a projection of what's needed in the city.
Right.
So that's why I just said that, we're constantly looking at these improvements to see and to show you and the public what's coming down the road here. I can argue that what we had in place this year was much higher when we sat down at the table first than what we're showing you now.
Right.
So
Okay,
again, it's fluid. I start out my presentation, we're all the way here. This is what we need. We bring it down based on your requirements and, constituency feedback. So it's all moving in the right direction. Sometimes
So you
it's-
would expect next year's to come down as well? I mean, I didn't notice it until after Jay got up and spoke about the other stormwater, that sure enough, that increase is largely due to the big stormwater numbers in 2022. Just happens to be, it's maybe a coincidence that that's what it adds up to, but that's what it is. So,
Well, and with everything else, prices go up.
Right,
So
right.
if we defer something this year, then we're probably going to see an increase in it next year.
Yeah, and remember also that anything we're spending money on from a capital perspective this year, we won't have next year.
Right,
And so that money, like, for example, the bathrooms on
Right.
Delaware, that'll be an additional $280,000 that we can utilize.
I'm talking about
towards-
the totals.
No, I'm just saying, across the board, there's a
Right.
number of different things that we're putting into place this year. So next year, with the same amount of revenue, we'll
that-
have money left over to do the capital projects in the CIP, or hopefully, close to it.
That's not what, but the total goes up, is all I'm saying. I mean, there are just as many, there are more projects slated for next year than there are for this year.
Well,
for the
part of it's
2.2
because we
million.
defer a lot of
Right.
things this year, and so they go to the next year as opposed to, 2023 or 24, and
So,
which
and
they
actually,
may end up doing that
if you
when
look
we talk about it next year.
Yeah, I mean, 23 looks worse at 6.5. I don't even want to
But
look at that one.
to Commissioner Calusi's point, we're deferring it.
Deferring.
She put 5 million there, we're only doing 3.
Right.
But if you look past, in the past, there have been so many things that have been deferred. This is something we're going to run into, not only just for the first 5 years, it's probably the next 10 years that we're going to have these type of projects going on, just to get us back to where we should be, not to being much better than we are, but where we should be at this point in time.
There are likely expenses we can't anticipate today that may come up. There's going to be some infrastructure problems that may
always
just pop up
emergencies.
and emergencies
Yeah,
and so
I mean, if you look at that video that Kevin gave us the other day on Delaware Avenue, I mean, those are the type of things we don't know about until we go
right.
there.
And if you drive down First Street today between Wilmington and Delaware Avenue, you'll see it's closed because we're digging the street up for a failed stormwater pipe.
And I just want to take this opportunity to commend the mayor and Sharon. 3 years ago, it was the first thing that you guys focused on as part of the budget cycle. And I can tell you, I know, Susan, this is your first budget cycle, but every year we look at all those priorities and our revenue, and Sharon comes forward with a recommended list of priorities based on the revenue that we have and the criticality of these projects to the city. And
Another
it's
thing
worked out
we can thank the
incredibly.
2010 CDP for.
Oh, it was fun.
It took a while to do it.
Well, yeah, and I'd say it was finally implemented 2 years ago. So now we're in our third year, and we look at that entire list of projects for each year during that budget cycle, and we prioritize. So this year, I see a lot of stormwater improvements that came out of the investment the year before in running the camera through. So now this year, we're funding those improvements. So it's an outstanding vehicle. And again, I was at a training session with the state, and the moderator asked how many cities actually had a capital plan like this. And you know who raised their hand? Me. That's it. That's the only and it was probably 20 municipalities represented. So just kudos to you, and I know we're continuing to improve this process every year. So I just wanted to point out that it's come a long way, and it's a really valuable tool for discussion as part of the budget. So thank you.
And thank you, but, this is something I have never worked without. So when I came here and there was no 5-year CIP, You know, that's something I did want to implement. But not to embarrass the finance director, but I will tell you that, you know, Bert has worked on this budget for probably 12 years now, and he is used to seeing a less than $1 million CIP. This CIP is, I'll call it a misnomer to call it a wish list, because everything contained in here are items that are, you know, a requirement, the majority of them, I'll say. But, you know, Bert has struggled with us coming forward himself as a resident, as a taxpayer. You know, we have such a high capital improvement plan right now. But then, as we do with you, we show Bert, Kevin shows Bert the issue with the, I'll call it the malfunction of the sewer and the system and what we have, and he was quite surprised by that. So I think we have to get it past Bert before we even bring it to you. So,
I don't think I have that much influence.
Where do we want to go from this point? I've got some individual line item questions and comments on the budget itself. Are we moving into that point, or are we still talking high level?
The more things we get done,
Okay. I think this will be hopefully easy, short and sweet. One, Bert, a question. What is a fund line item? It's main, CONT. What does that stand for?
which page you looking at?
It's a line item on every single budget department. I'll give you one example. This is on the munis.
what
I'm looking at
department?
the munis.
There's page numbers up
Yeah,
there
yeah.
in the right corner. If you
Let me
could
look
give-
at one of the
If you
first
can give us
ones.
a page number.
Not everyone has it.
There's page.
Yeah, I'm just looking for one of the pages that has it on it.
Actually, I don't see page number. Oh, yeah, okay, there are, I got it, I got it.
Oh, maintenance contracts.
Maintenance contracts, okay, thank you. I just didn't know what that stood for. Thank you, that's helpful. First question is related to the bandstand. Sharon, it looks like for this fiscal year, it has come in under budget at 79,000. Budgeted was 85, yet for this upcoming budget year, we're budgeting 100,000. I'm just wondering why that is.
So the bandstand director is looking to enhance the programs as he's done in the past, and this year it came in lower also because we had several rain dates. So although we do have to pay for those, some of that funding is reduced because of that. The revenue line item in the bandstand is goes into just the bandstand budget and not the general fund. And I would say that our bandstand director, who attends meetings on a regular basis, not just in the summer, but throughout the year, is compensated for that. So if I'm answering your question, maybe.
No, I'm just looking at the program expense, going from 85,000 to 100,000.
Page you talking about?
This is
Okay.
page 90,
I got it.
34.
So the 85 to 100, I'll say that we've been able to work with the current budget to anticipate yearly maintenance costs and materials that are continuously exposed to weather conditions, salt, and other various conditions. It's, you know, we need to consider the wear and tear of that. So the increase is basically due to an additional $35,000 for supplies that the bandstand director thinks that's needed for service of the equipment. Does that help?
It is, and that's coming out of the program expense, maintenance as well?
The current budget from 85 to 100.
Thank you. Then looking at the parks budget, I understand there's an increase. We're doing the capital outlay for $100,000 for the tot lot, yet the parks budget still has increased, well, it's increasing by $200,000. 100 of that is capital outlay, but that additional $100,000 is still a 20% increase in the parks budget. What is that for?
Part of that is due because we combined the Parks Department with the Recreation Department, so we now have the Parks and Recreation Department combined instead of separate. And the additional money that you're seeing there is from the Recreation Department that we pay for our summer programs. Also, we're going to see quite a bit of savings in the future in that line item itself, because our current city arborist, who will become the Park and Recreation Department supervisor, is attending training in the next fiscal year to be certified as a playground inspector. That will save us approximately $16,000 annually in contracted costs, because we have a playground inspector coming in now that we pay $1,400 6 times a year for each visit to inspect our playgrounds.
Okay.
So Liz will be the inspector now and be able to, we'll see that savings.
Okay, now I'm going to go back to page 1, Mayor and Commissioner's budget. Legal expenses actual for this fiscal year to date is just under $250,000, yet we're only budgeting $200,000 again. Are we under budgeting for that?
You know, again, that's a guesstimate.
The year before was 192.
Yeah. It's
And I
moves
guess
up and
my
down.
same question is on building and licensing as well. Legal fees were, over budget this year, yet we're budgeting the same amount for this fiscal year. I just want to make sure we're not under budgeting if the trend is going in a certain direction.
I hope that we're not. I mean, again, that changes in and of itself, and it's a guesstimate. We try to stay under as much as possible, but, you know, things come up.
Yeah, no, I obviously trust your judgment. Just noticed it, so I'm asking the question. Under the administration budget, page 3, memos and publications are going up by $7,000, which is about 70%. Is there a reason for that?
I'd say we have additional employees who are taking advantage of enhanced professional development, and that's partly what's responsible for that. For instance, we have Mr. Miller here, who's no longer can be classified a fellow, and he was being paid or actually gratis to go to the ICMA conferences. So now, as a regular employee, we now pay for Evan's ICMA membership dues and everything that's associated with his position. We were on a free ride
well
before.
worth the money for Evan.
I think so.
Thank you for that. Board of Adjustment, I'm assuming that's what BOA stands for. There's an $80,000 budget item for that, yet the past 2 or 3 years, it's only been about $30,000.
What was that again?
BOA, under the
Oh, the
administration
Board of
budget.
Adjustment, yes. Well, we've had increased fees through the Board of Adjustment, as you're aware, so that's the reason for that increase.
Okay, my only question is, it looks like this fiscal year, the actual is about $30,000, and the year prior, it was $27,000.
Well, anticipating what could come up in the future, let me just say that.
Are those primarily legal fees?
Some of that, yes.
You know, but this ties into, at one point, we were going to look at fees across the board, because, and that's a great example, because it seems like Board of Adjustment costs ought to be covered by people who are coming before the Board of Adjustment. So if we're making, if we're, looking at the people who use the system, paying for the system, then should we look at the fees for? I might be missing something there.
Agreed, but I think that's
Might be missing
that's a
something.
whole different
Yeah,
topic
right.
that we need to address.
Yeah, right, not for today, I know.
Yeah. That's why, legal fees.
We've
okay.
had legal fees some years in Board of Adjustment. that
Right, yeah, okay.
Drove the cost up. And
Okay,
we've
so
hired
that, so it's not
consultants.
just the cases that come before them, it's other thing, okay.
Yeah.
So it's all in legal?
One thing I will mention, you're looking at the 2020 actual. Keep in mind, we're still in 2020
Right.
right now.
Correct, yeah.
So that's not a full year
Oh,
when you're making a comparison.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense, yeah.
Now I'm going to page 11, communications. It looks like the advertising budget for communications has always been $40,000, yet the expenditures have never even come close to that. Is there a reason why we continue to budget $40,000 for that?
We can reduce that accordingly, but we were able to produce some things in-house and send items out now. We have, some savings I think we can recoup in that, so that can be reduced.
I think I just have two more items or questions. Under the streets department, page 14, it looks like part-time salaries are going up 21% this year. Is there a specific reason for that?
Can you address that?
I don't know about the percentage, but we are bringing on 3 additional part-time staff through the summer to take care of the recycling on the boardwalk. So that was a.
I'll make a comment about the budget process for salaries. I budget by each individual employee, each individual position. So if they're going to add a person, I'll add that person, but there's pretty detailed work put in there to try to nail down the correct amount of salaries.
Right. So if it's just if there's no change in positions, it's going to be a 2% increase. If there's an additional employee being added, it's going to be that amount plus the overall budget increase.
Yeah, well, yes. One thing that benefits us sometimes is people who leave their position, leave a vacancy. I love that.
And we don't hire someone right away, or we fill those positions in with seasonal, so that decreases insurance and everything else that goes along with that.
Okay.
So just to follow on to that real quick, in another meeting, we had asked how many positions were being added in this year's budget, and I think the response was 1 electrician to backfill a position that hadn't been filled in a couple years, so it already existed. You're just filling it now because you weren't able to outsource. And then the 3 part-time to handle the recycling. Is that pretty much the only, increase in staff for this year, in this year's budget?
Yes, and I'd say we've actually decreased admin staff. We lost an individual this year, and we added responsibilities to 2 other employees to make up for that loss. So we didn't hire a replacement.
Oh, okay. So net zero, really, in
Well,
terms of
we were
increase in
able
staff?
to hire a part-time individual for Ms. Womack, who, as you know, has quite an amount of paperwork to deal with. So that's actually been an enhancement in the part-time staff for Ann.
Okay, so just 1 full-time and then 3 or 4 part-time is what I'm hearing, is that correct?
Yes.
And you eliminated a position too, so, okay, great, thanks.
And Kevin, the recycling part-time are seasonal.
Correct.
Sharon, thank you for answering, and Kevin and Bert as well. Thank you for answering the questions. I've got one last thing stuck out at me. That's also under streets, page 16. Other professional services has typically been budgeted about $16,000. That's going up 4 times to $67,000. Other professional services?
Top of page 16.
If you need to get back to us, that's perfectly fine. It's just, it's something
so-
that stuck out at me.
What page are you on? You're on page
It's
16?
page
Top
16
the
under
first line,
streets.
The first line on 16.
It might have just be a typo too. You might have typed 67 instead of 16, I don't know.
We can,
It just seems like a pretty big increase.
yeah, we can get back to you on that.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Anybody else?
Looking pretty good.
Yeah, well, I think there's one other budget item we need to discuss. And it deals with the canal access project. So,
Mayor, I'm going to recuse myself at this point.
Okay, great. And just for everybody, remember, at 3 o'clock, we've got a special meeting to talk about the bids that we received, and then it'll be on the agenda at the meeting afterwards as well. Go ahead.
and this is kind of a precursor to the meeting later today. We, as many of you are aware, we've had the open bid for the construction of the Grove Park Canal access. The bids did come in a little bit higher than the independent budget or estimate had indicated. And so there's a gap between what the contract price would be for the responsible contractor with the lowest bid and the current funding. And I just wanted to kind of review where we are with that. As which may not be known to everybody, is that the concept of a canal access was actually addressed in the 2010 Comprehensive Development Plan, and specifically mentioned the recreational value and the value of connecting Lewis and Rehoboth Beach by the canal waterway. And so this isn't a new idea. I think some people are under the impression that this is something that was just beginning to be discussed in the last couple years. For a number of years now, there has been the Lewis Rehoboth Canal Improvement Association, which is a nonprofit organization that has been very aggressively seeking funding for this project so that it would be a reduced burden on the city. But even in the Comprehensive Development Plan in 2010, it was contemplated that this would be a potentially a public-private partnership because of the value of having that utility or that infrastructure, as well as you know, to kind of improve a number of things within the city. And so we currently have, and it was originally intended that there would not need to be any cash outlay by the city. But things change and costs increase and reality sets in. And so the current situation is there is a $280,101.37 gap between what the current funding level is and what the contract price would be.
I'm sorry, what was that gap, Steve?
$280,101.37.
Could you please, we're talking about.
Yeah,
something
could you
that-
please let,
This is not on the budget itself. We're talking about a budget item that we'd like to put on the agenda. He's talking about it now, about the canal dock.
well, if I could,
We're discussing.
if I could finish, I will explain these things. If you'd be, well,
Is this part of item 4, which continued discussion of draft budget, and something you'd like to consider us to add into the draft budget?
yes, yeah, I apologize for not being as crisp as I could have been. So anyhow, the composition, the LRCIA has currently raised about $1,100,000 through their efforts, and part of that 1.1 million is money that we've received through the state. There have been some grants there, and it's significant dollars. We've received $300,000, or the association received $300,000 in a grant from DelDOT. There's almost $50,000 from Outdoor Recreation Parks and Trails Program from DENREC. There's $200,000 of a bond bill appropriation that we've received through Representative Pete Schwarzkopf's efforts to represent us. And so there's in excess of roughly half of that money that if the project isn't awarded, that money will not be used. And so it's a pretty critical position that we're in today. And so I just want to make sure that all the information is out there. Mark Carter, who represents the LRCIA, is here today and can get into the details a little bit more, but there's still an aggressive effort to continue to raise additional funds to bridge that gap or to reduce that gap even further, and those efforts will continue. What I wanted to introduce today is that we're at a critical point here and time is running out. This is a project that's been long contemplated for the city, and what we're talking about in reality is that the city would need to demonstrate its commitment to the success of the project by obligating the $280,000. It's not an expenditure. It's an obligation so that the contract can be awarded and it will be fully funded. As time goes on and as the project proceeds, any additional funds that LRCIA is able to obtain would offset that amount and would reduce the burden on the city. And City Manager, am I saying anything that's not consistent with what your understanding is?
No, that's my understanding, and my intention was to go into detail as far as the project is concerned, I mean, I think what your intention is to talk about the funding because we're in the budget meeting.
Right.
Later on today, we'll talk about the actual bid that came in and the bid results, and we'll have Mr. Spong here to explain that to the commissioners. But this is in particular about the funding.
Yes, yes. And I think that you'll agree that we're at a pretty critical state here, that if we're going to do this contract has to be awarded before the 8th of May, or March, before the 8th of March, or the proposal that is before us will lapse.
That's correct. The bids were open in January. There was a 60-day time frame in order to award that bid, and it will expire on March.
So why are we hearing about it on February 21st?
We're hearing.
Please.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead, please.
Well, again, this is a budget meeting. I think your next meeting is March 10th, I believe. So.
Yeah, no, I understand the timing. I have to tell you, when I got the stuff on Wednesday night, I was absolutely stunned. Stunned.
Go ahead, Chair.
Well, and that's, I just wanted to, there's a lot of interest, and it's been expressed through emails and other means. I just wanted to make sure that we're upfront and sharing all the details. But I do believe that it shouldn't go unnoticed that this was something that's been in the works for years, that it is we have over $1 million in infrastructure money that the city doesn't have to come up with because of the efforts of Mark Carter and his associates with the LRCIA, and that there are tremendous benefits for us having a facility like this to improve the experience that residents and visitors can have in our city. And so I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything to that.
I do have something to add. As Commissioner Sheffer mentioned, this project itself goes back probably before the city agreed with the Historical Society to lease them the building at the old ice house that's now the museum. Actually, the dock portion of this was phase 3 of the project down at the museum. The original phase 1 was reconstruction of the museum and advancement of that, enhancement of that. Phase 2 was the deck over the garden in the back, if you will, a little bit of outcropping over the riprap. And then phase 3 was going to be the dock. Originally, the phase 1 got shut down because they went over budget on the museum. And so phase 2 and 3 were held up. And that was probably back in 2007 or 8. So it has been a long time. Phase 2 and 3 were going to be something that was going to be done in the future. Fortunately, the city stepped up and paid pretty much so for phase 2, the area in the back of the museum that is now part of the bike trail, and the fencing along there, and the cleanup of the riprap, with the idea that over time, the riprap would be maintained, no growth of any kind of vegetation or whatnot, and then the possibility of building a dock at that time. And plans were put on the table. And then with the economic crisis and whatnot, the city decided, okay, we're not going to move on to phase 3. It's going to be an expensive proposition at that point in time. They had to look at plans. Some plans were drawn up at that point in time. And at that point in time, the LRCIA, a nonprofit group, started getting together. And I think the first meetings may have been in 07 or 08 to talk about a public-private kind of project for a municipal dock. At that point in time, they talked about, the governor at the time was pushing hard on alternate ways of transportation, to utilize different ways of transportation in the state, and his big thing was waterways. And so if you notice, probably in that time period, a number of different municipalities on the waterways on the eastern shore here have been improved with docks or other infrastructure. So again, over time, all of a sudden, the city had a presentation from LRCIA probably in 2010 or 11 or so about that. And at that point in time, the city commissioners decided not to move forward with it. But the LRCIA wanted to continue to work on the project and possibly raise the money. There was some money put forward to do some preliminary plans on it. And at that point in time, it was put in front of the city and the LRCIA. And it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $850,000, a very big number. Over time, there were some additions. And then obviously, at this point in time in January, the actual bids came in much higher than we had estimated. However, over that time period, the LRCIA was diligently working across the state on raising money. We were very surprised about the bids in January, but as Commissioner Sheffer mentioned, we do have almost $1.1 million on the table for the project. That's technically free money for us. That's technically money that'll go away if we don't use it. And I know he mentioned it, but I'm going to mention it again, that the support from the entire community. We've had a number of different comments over the last 5 or 6 years, whether in the newspapers, calls, emails, crediting the city for doing something like this to share with the community. Whether you live outside of Rehoboth or you live inside, so many people were really excited about this project. So much so that, Representative Schwarzkopf, Senator Lopez put up a substantial amount of money. We had $20,000 from Representative Schwarzkopf, $100,000 from Senator Lopez, both from the Transportation Fund. As mentioned, the Transportation Alternatives Program, which is DELDOT, $300,000. The bond bill from Representative Schwarzkopf, another $200,000. We've had a foundation put in $100,000, $150,000, and then pledges from a number of large local privately owned companies up and over $100,000. And so, you know, right now, I look at this as a community dock, municipal dock. This is not something that a lot of the commissioners thought early on that this was going to be some kind of a revenue-producing thing for water taxi. If the water taxi picks people up or drops them off at that point in time, I would think that's fine. My hope is that people use the dock, much as they're using Grove Park, much as they're using the visitor center for the chamber, as well as the museum, as a public amenity. I look at this also that $280,000, and hopefully we don't have to spend that much because they will continue over the next year. And again, construction on this, I would say, if we give them the go-ahead, maybe it's done by this time next year. I'm not sure. Maybe it's later in the year. So there's a full year of continued operations on their side from the fundraising perspective. I also look at this and I say, you know what? If we want to look at this budget, we can look at this. This money is coming from specific funding that we get from parking, from the rental tax, from the accommodations tax. That's more than 50% of our budgeted revenues, and that's coming from people that come from outside of town. This is not a cost that would be shared by our residents, although it is an amenity that would be shared by our residents. And so, I mean, I think this project is a long time coming. And one last thing, the way I look at this is much like the Lake Avenue project. The Lake Avenue project that we're in phase 2 on, basically the state has said, okay, it's $1 million project. We'll put up $800,000. You put up $200,000. I don't see anybody saying, okay, let's not have that, and because it's $200,000 the city doesn't want to pay. And I look at this as, and I don't want to say it because of the work that the LRCIA has done, is this is kind of free money. It's over $1 million for a project. So we're going to, if we end up paying $280,000, it's $280,000 for a great city portion of our city parks and a great amenity that I'm sure many people will use, especially the residents and the businesses in town. So I just wanted to add that to give it a little bit more history, and I'm sorry about being so long and winded. No. But I think it is important. It's something that mentioned in the CDP. It's been kind of in the background for the last 10 or 12 years. It has had many people comment on it, and I would say the majority of the people very positive. And people have been waiting for it, and I've had people in town saying, when is it going to happen? I want to be able to drop my friends off the dock when I, use my boat. And, so we can use that end of town. The last portion of this is there is a lot of development going on in town, but a lot of it on the western end of town. And this is the entrance to the city. And I think one of the things that we did recently was very positive, cleaning up the riprap there behind the museum right on the canal, because now you can come across the bridge and you can actually see the museum. You can actually see the city as you're coming into town and over to Grove Park. So I'm very much in favor of doing this. I think this is something that in the long run will be very positive for the city. Excuse me. Oh, thank you. Commissioners, anything? I know.
I have a lot of questions and a lot of some other additional background, but I was under the impression we were supposed to save that for the meeting this afternoon since this is a budget discussion. So let me just bring up my concerns budget-wise. This has been around for a long time, but it has never once made it to the CIP, and we're in the 3rd year of the CIP, and there are dozens and dozens and dozens of other projects in here, and this has never been in it. And we said earlier that yes, things come into the CIP at times when we don't expect it. Those would be considered emergencies. Are we saying that this is the same level of magnitude as the stormwater improvements that Kevin identified through his cameras, or any number of other stormwater infrastructure improvements that we have to make? I don't think it is. I will say this, that I think the LRCIA has done a marvelous job of fundraising. It's extremely impressive, and they seem to have done a lot just since the bids have come in. And I would say to them, great job, keep going, because they obviously have, probably would be able to raise the funds. Can they raise them by March 8th? Maybe not, but they will also need to, our primary obligation will come once it's built for 40 years after that from the maintenance of it. The maintenance is only covered for the first 2. So the public-private partnership, the public part will be many times over what the private part contributed over the years. And the private part contributed is not asking a lot for them to be able to meet that obligation to fund when every vote that's ever been taken on the canal dock, starting, I think the first vote on moving forward the design was in 2013, the statement was always made that it would not require city funding to be built. That's the problem I'm having with where it is in the budget today.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, I'm not sure if you're the appropriate person or the representative here, but I know that I've agreed to host a fundraiser and make a contribution myself. I've not done that yet. Is that considered in the amount that's needed?
Why don't we, do you mind if we have
Yeah,
Mark come up?
great. Absolutely.
Mark, you, probably over there is the easiest. And please introduce yourself.
I'm tall, sorry. Good morning, Mark Carter, and I am with the Lewis Rehoboth Canal Improvement Association. I've been in front of this group on multiple occasions over the last decade. First, I'd like to say thank you to the commissioners, thank you to the mayor for letting us have an opportunity to discuss this. Thanks for having an opportunity back in June to say that the city was interested in seeing this move forward. A public-private partnership like this is how a lot of things get done. We've been able to raise, as mentioned, a little bit over $1 million. And that money has come from really beating the street out there, talking to businesses, talking to people, foundations, submitting grants on our own time. We're made up of a group of volunteers that represent tourism across the state, different towns in the state, and folks that come in and out of Rehoboth, as well as folks that live in Rehoboth. So we have a pretty good idea of how tourism fuels the city as well. And this is another opportunity where folks come into a city, they see this beautiful gateway. I can say as a parent that lives outside the city, coming to the park to go to Grove Park with my kids when they were young. When the bank was growing up, you never saw it there. A lot of folks that come and work at Dogfish, where I'm employed, never knew there was a park there and things like that. And the fact is, once they discover them, they become these jewels. And just like in Lewis, where there's access to the water, you can't drive down a street and not see paddle boards and kayaks and things of such on vehicles anymore. I could probably walk outside and see cold weather folks that are, venturing in the water now. And those things, there's no way to get in the water in Rehoboth. Not everyone wants to go into the ocean. The canal provides that, that opportunity. And it's something that isn't a new idea. It has been part of the plan at the museum, part of the development plan, the vision and such. And the last decade, we've put in significant hours on this. And I'd like to say that over that time, things have changed. I think anybody that was here 10 years ago will say, wow, Rehoboth looks a lot different than it did then. And if you were here, I grew up in Delaware. I was here when the Seahorse was a restaurant and worked there. I could say Rehoboth has drastically changed over the years. And that's something to take into account. We live in a very dynamic time, and folks are doing things that maybe we didn't do. They're getting on the water on paddleboards and kayaks. They want to just go and sit by the canal there. At a history program in the museum can go down onto the dock and continue the education, actually right there, not a photograph on the wall, but physically, literally touching the water and talk about things. So there's a lot of opportunities that exist. And from a funding end, as mentioned, we are continuing to fundraise. We're not going to let up on fundraising. One of the things in the last 2 weeks, partly reflected in those numbers, we raised over $130,000 in the last 2 weeks because folks see that this is coming very close to being a real thing, not a vision, not an article that's been in the paper over the last decade, but a real thing. And folks are excited. So we're confident that we can continue to fundraise and help to contribute to this project in any way possible. And pardon me, a couple of things on that too, from the the funding end, like any project, when our estimates were made, this project was a year and a half out or so. Things change with price. So yes, the price was a little higher than what we estimated. But I think anyone that's built a house here has probably experienced that in some capacity or another. I know we have with our establishments across the street. And that's, has to be taken into consideration. A few of the things that I think are very important to mention as well are, hearing the budget talks today, I understand there's a lot of things. Wastewater. We deal with wastewater as a brewery. I deal with wastewater in the town of Milton with an antiquated wastewater facility. So we understand these things. We know these are things that have to occur. But if everything is always focused on only those nuts and bolts, there's no attraction to anyone to be here. This is something that $1 million has been given.
Excuse me, sir. Mr. Mayor, point of order. There's people in the audience being disrespectful and speaking when they shouldn't. If they can't restrain themselves to speak when they're able to, they should be asked to leave.
Thank you.
What I was trying to illustrate is that it's a balance. We have to have things that balance out, and folks want to come to the beach to do things. And this is something that is, and it's beautiful looking, it's an attraction to the city, and it is, a lot of funds have been raised towards it. That this money, if it's not able to go towards the project, pretty much almost everything will be returned. The bond bill will expire. ORPT grants can be extended, but a lot of these funds will be returned, and then the next project that comes will we be looked at and said, oh, well, we might not give to that because it's not the time for them on projects right now. It's something to consider, and I want to put that out there. But I do want to, illustrate.
Can I just ask a really quick question,
Yes, ma'am.
just to clarify in my head as you're discussing? Just thank you for your time and for taking the initiative to bring new ideas to our city. So thank you. I did want to ask the question on numbers real quick. We had $1,074,000 as I kind of look at the data, right? You have $1,074,000 from donations and that sort of thing.
Correct,
And then you
donations
said-
and pledges.
Right,
Yes.
and then you said you also raised an additional $130K.
That's reflected in
Oh, in
those
the
numbers, ma'am.
1.074.
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Yes,
Okay.
that is reflected at
Okay,
the
I
last.
just wanted to clarify that.
When
Thank
the bids came in, we didn't lighten up. We continued. That's where we were able to work with Representative Schwarzkopf, have an additional
Okay.
20,000 contributed, and then we also worked with some corporations
That's
in the area
all
to
that's
support.
brought us up to 1.1,
Correct.
basically.
The numbers on that sheet are reflective of where we are today. The two columns, one being what is available, one being the pledges.
Okay.
And
Got it. I thought maybe you had an additional beyond the time.
And the
of
reason we're
this
just
chart.
hearing about it is because you wanted to be as close as possible before.
Correct.
getting
Yes,
to-
we didn't want to give you numbers that were inaccurate.
Right, okay.
And as I mentioned, as the project goes on,
Right.
a year ago estimates are different than if we did it out
Do you
today.
do you think given more time, you'd be able to cover that additional 280,000 if you had another month or whatnot? Would you be able to cover that 280 deficit?
I'm confident we can continue to fundraise. I don't want to speculate and say, yes, we can do that, or no, we can't. I work
That was
in
kind
the
of an unfair
nonprofit side of things, and
Yeah.
I understand nonprofits asking for funds. But what I would like to say is that, and this kind of goes to a maintenance question that I heard come up. One of the things is, yes, some of the initial maintenance is covered. The association, the Lewis-Rehoboth Canal Improvement Association, wants to continue to fundraise even after the project would be completed with funds that could be made available to that. And based off some estimates, I did a quick math, and it would be probably at least, it would be many, many years before the maintenance costs equate to the cost of the free money that's being made available right now. So I think it's something where
Is the maintenance a year? It's about 7,000. What did you estimate?
estimates, we were, and I don't have the number right in front of me, but estimate-wise, we were close to 10. We were just under 10, like 7 or 8. And then when the bid came, they were a little bit higher, understanding that it probably lies in the middle there, because as the project, you find out the new materials or this or that, things like that come into play.
A 10 a year, 10K a year.
10 to 15, I would say, would roughly. You're looking predominantly at vegetation probably, and some replacing
I
just
know
some
it's in
planks
your
now and then.
documents, I just wanted you to summarize it for
Has the issue of
everybody.
dredging ever come up? I mean, is there a thought that it might have to be dredged? I read recently where Henlopen and Acres is having to dredge, consider dredging again when they spent $200,000 a few years ago doing that. So
I'm not a resident of
I'll
Henlopen, so.
interrupt on that. Henlopen Acres is dredging their marina. They own that.
okay.
The city doesn't own the canal. It's the Army Corps of Engineers. And the Army Corps of Engineers, as most people realize, does all the replenishment on the beaches. Well, that's one of the things that the Association of Coastal Towns is asking the federal government as well as the state government to put up more and more for replenishment and also dredging. Most of the municipalities away from Rehoboth have issues with dredging. Rehoboth has issues with dredging there. But at low tide, you can still get boats through there, but, the draft is maybe 2.5. It's like a pontoon boat. I've walked through there in the years, but they had a dredging about 15 years ago. But that is not part of the situation. That's an expensive thing that hopefully at some point in time, the Army Corps of Engineers will say we can.
That's my concern in terms of ongoing, is I was at that same Coastal Towns meeting where I was talking about the needs for the Army Corps of Engineers, and I guess this is nationwide, is like 10 times what their budget is.
Probably more.
And the expectation was, you're not going to get the federal funding that you need. And so.
But it is a federal waterway, and I don't think they let that dry up. So at some point in time, that may be
It's a matter of
needed.
where it falls on their priority list. So I would say keep raising those funds, we're going to need
But the last dredging was about 20 years ago. And so, I don't notice that it's going to happen anytime soon.
But just as a reminder, the reason that I brought this up at this meeting is because we're at a critical time here as far as awarding the contract and the fact that funds have to be committed, not expended. And so I think I'm strongly encouraged by what Mark is sharing about the aggressive efforts by he and his colleagues in the LRCIA to not only continue to seek additional funding for the construction of the project, but for the ongoing maintenance. And so I just believe, as a resident here and as somebody who just has that in my vision for what the future of Rehoboth can be, that it isn't, for the long-term benefits that we'll gain from this, having a short-term commitment of $280,000 that most likely will not be expended and not be spent and not really come out of the budget is not a big thing to ask for, to show the city's commitment to the project that Mark Carter described so eloquently, and that'll benefit residents as well as people who come to visit Rehoboth Beach.
Can I ask a question? Steve, I know, I really appreciate you. There's a big difference between commitment and expenditure. And the commitment you're asking, or we're asking here, is to be able to take advantage of the funding from the state and from other, organizations where there is you have to start the project within a given period of time. Have we considered, and Sharon, I just don't know the answer to this, have we considered, instead of just, a handshake agreement on a commitment for the 280, is it possible to loan the 280 to the nonprofit, and then, with some sort of repayment schedule built into that loan? And I know the first question will be, well, what if they don't raise it? And this, okay, and yes, we can address those risks, but is that a possibility, something the city could do? I'm not saying we'd all agree to doing it that way or even agree to the project, but is that an option in this process?
So because this is the budget discussion, any funding that the city commissioners would approve to make to the LRCIA would have to be documented in this budget, in next year's fiscal year budget. So $280,000 would have to be shown on the expense side. And again, what does that mean? That means $280,000, because now we have a balanced budget, would need to be removed from something.
I understand that part, but could it be the contract or the agreement between the nonprofit and the city, could it be a loan versus, I understand how it has to be documented in the budget, I get that. But we have reserves and we have all those other things. So could it be a loan that we require them to pay back to us?
I'm not familiar with municipalities loaning money to a nonprofit. If it certainly could be
don't know if
done
it's
if it was established as a public-private partnership, but not at this point, at least, as a loan.
We can't at this point, or you just don't know at this point?
No, I'm saying that as far as I know, it's not possible.
And I think you have to think about also, the LRCIA has raised $1 million here. Could they raise the additional 280? Yes. I think that's a possibility, especially if we can extend it out so that the final payment isn't for a year plus. But on the other side, from raising money in nonprofits, that's the last thing nonprofits like to do is borrow, unless they have a steady stream of income. And I don't see any steady stream of income coming from this. But that's something that over time the nonprofit can consider. But as Commissioner Sheffer said, this is something from a time perspective, it's, are we going to spend the 280? Not necessarily. Can we make the commitment for 280? I hope so. However, we have to accept this bid, start the project, accept the bid by March 8th, or otherwise it falls away and who knows what may happen, and maybe start the project or spend some of those monies, but some of those, as Mark said, may be able to be extended. So that the project can be kind of stretched out over time. That gives the LRCIA more time to raise money. Raising $280,000 in a month, I'd say it's impossible. Raising $280,000 in a year, good possibility, especially given the fact that we just got $130,000.
You got 130 over what period of time?
About 2 to 2.5 weeks, the last
Well,
2.5 weeks.
And it's because we've had the bids.
Month would be 260 then.
Yeah, but so the bids are in,
I mean-
and so people see this as something that's going to happen. And for the longest time.
It still is something that's going to happen.
Absolutely. And for the longest time, people have been looking at it and say, yeah, but the city's never going to do it. Well, we said last year, we're all in favor of it. Let's work forward. And at that point in time, we were hoping for an $800,000 budget. If we had an $800,000 budget, man, we got maintenance for 20
Well,
years.
but we've known since last summer that it wasn't going to be 800. When the staff did their analysis and got up and did,
It was going to be 950 to $1 million.
It was a little over $1 million at that point. Yeah.
And so,
it's not new news.
these things, some of the articles on the bid itself were because the city required
Right,
certain
exactly.
lighting,
Yeah,
certain
I know.
safety issues.
Right.
And so those add-ons were pretty substantial. And so, right now, we've got a number that ends up being somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.4+ million, and that's where the 280 comes from.
What exactly is the March, I want to understand this March 8th deadline. That is,
The bid.
so that's when the bid expires, so the funding doesn't automatically go away on March 8th. It's just that the contractor's bid is no longer valid.
Some of the
So you
funds
could
would
get an-
expire by June, though.
Can't we extend that? I mean,
So
to
you
give
could get a
additional
new
time?
bid in April
Or
May.
you can extend the current.
I'm not familiar with the bid process. It works for the city, so they would know the timelines more than I would on that. I don't
You
want
can
to
extend
interject
the
a
bid, right?
incorrect.
I mean,
That's not always the easiest thing in the world.
I'm not
And-
saying
glad
it's
to know that
easy,
the-
but
that
I
the
just
funds
want to
are-
know if it's possible.
And the next bid was a good $100,000 more.
I'm not asking the question, I'm asking mechanically. I mean, we used to do it in my previous positions. Can you extend the time frame for the closing of the bidding process?
So you can
Is it allowed?
always ask the low bidder for permission to extend the bid.
Okay.
That part of the conversation about this one particular topic will come into play with Mr. Spong at the special meeting at 3 o'clock.
Okay, so that's
Okay.
a possibility.
So it is a
Maybe he has more
possibility,
information.
potentially a
Absolutely, yes,
possibility.
yes.
That's good.
Or it's a possibility. When does the state funding run, when do we have to expend?
I believe
Did you
it's
say
June.
what date?
June. I'm
That's
not
what
sure the
I
specific
thought.
day.
Okay.
One thing that I'd like to
Okay, thank
mention is, as is common with many construction projects of this nature, there's a required contingency portion of this. In this particular case, there's $100,000 contingency that is part of the contract. And it's just like when you're having a major renovation down on a residential property, things happen. And so with the best planning, you know, there's very rarely a deal where the contractor says it's going to be $500,000 and there aren't things that come up that were unexpected. And so this contingency is designed to cover those types of unforeseen minor things that come up. There's a good chance that 100,000 would never really come into play. And so, again, this is a moving, thank you for the laughter.
Just because you just said that they all, that it never comes in on budget.
No, I'm just saying, you know, we don't know everything. We know a lot now, but we don't know everything that we don't know.
Of course not.
And so, and one of those big things is how successful Mark and his colleagues will be in being able to raise additional funds to lessen the gap between the current funding level that's been done through the association and the contract price. And the reason that this is being discussed today is that if we're serious about having this project actually become reality, then at least in the short term, we need to be willing to make a commitment up to the $280,000 at the worst possible case. And if we don't, then, you know, this may never happen, and maybe somebody will be happy, maybe some people would be happy about that. But I believe personally that it would be a good thing for the city in the long term. And so I think we should strongly consider it. And I worked in the contracting business for 30 years before I retired. And a lot of contractors get a little bit nervous when they're asked to extend their bid because their price may go up. We've already talked about the increases that have occurred from a year ago. And these types of construction projects, and we talked a lot about it in the budget with the different, like with the different infrastructure projects. And so this is an opportunity to, we're positioned well to execute this contract now to go ahead and move forward and continue to do the good things that have been done over the last number of years to make this to reduce the burden on the city. It's not 100% that it would be on the residents, as the mayor discussed. You know, there's other revenue sources that far exceed what the residents contribute to the revenue of the city that could be used as sources for this in the future. And so I'll shut up, but I just think it's this is why we're talking about it today, because it does affect the budget process.
Commissioner, to be clear, the $100,000 contingency is inclusive in the 281?
That's correct.
Yes, it's in there.
And going back to timing, when did we get the bids in?
January.
Was it
January 8th.
Yeah.
January 8th, we opened the bids?
And when did they come back? What was the deadline for them to come back?
Oh, we opened the bids January 8th. So we advertised early December.
Okay.
I guess I would ask, Steve, what would you cut out of this budget in order to raise that 280?
I don't know.
Okay.
We leave that in the city manager's hands if we vote on it.
Oh, I don't think it's, I mean, I think the staff has done a great job in establishing the priorities for the operation and the budget needs of the city, so I don't think we should put that on them.
The one thing I would interject is from a fundraising aspect of this is there's opportunities. Some of the grants we receive, like the ORPT grant, there's a possibility to receive a second phase of that. And if this stops, then if we went back again, we probably wouldn't see an opportunity. So there are opportunities that once the project is moving, some of these other things can actually help to continue the project along. And then also from as going to potential donors, supporters and such, knowing that there's like skin in the game on both parties involved as a public-private partnership, that's a key piece to it. And I feel that the organization definitely has contributed, $1 million of that, working together with the city on some of those contributions. So I want to say thank you to commissioners for the opportunity to work on this, and to the folks, the city staff that's been involved, thank you for helping in all aspects of it as well.
Mark, a quick question, because you're segueing right into what I was going to ask. Are there specific plans that you and the LRCIA have to move the fundraising ahead? I mean, obviously, you just touched on a couple of things. Are there other specifics that can give us confidence that we can move toward this goal?
Yes. One of the points I alluded to earlier is now that, if the bid is awarded and there's the actual, construction is starting, going to take place, it's no longer here's a vision concept. People see that and they're much more likely to contribute. So some of our donors have been hesitant because they're like, well, it's been, 10 years, and one of the questions I get asked, what is the city contributing to this? And at this point, I said, they've assisted us in fundraising and shown support so we can proceed on grants. However, financially, there's been little to none. And I'm not saying that in a negative. I'm just saying that that's a question I answered honestly to the potential donor that asked the question.
And tell them we're going to be maintaining it for the next many decades.
Well, but I think to Mark's point, the fundraising is going to be ongoing.
Right, no, and that's great. That's wonderful. In fact, hearing that and how, so it's the starting of it that's a trigger for some of the...
Correct.
Then is there any possibility for phasing this in a couple of phases so that there's progress, but they raise the funds? I mean, I know the bids didn't ask for that. I understand that. So that's a new bid, I guess. But, I mean...
Remember also that
Sounds like there are specific plans.
Correct. One of the things that we've discussed
Really
is
encouraged to hear
establishing
all
an
that.
endowment within our organization that we could then contribute essentially, to, so that as that grows, we're able to contribute back to other aspects, because Rehoboth is part of the canal, but the canal goes a long ways.
Right.
And not to sound too goofy about this, but there's some merit to that. If you build it, they will come. And so, that includes people who are willing to make investment into the success of the project as well. Once they start to see that it's a real project and the city's behind it, and we have all the energy that your LRCIA has generated, that it could gain a little bit more momentum, and it could be at little effect on the city's budget.
I think it's incredibly exciting that external entities are investing $1.1 million to date in our little city. I mean, that's what I was excited about a few days ago when I opened my mail and I saw the detail of the amount of money that is already in the bank, so to speak, for this project. That's an incredible investment.
I have a very good point, very eloquently put, as usual. I have a question for Commissioner Gay. I know you've been a big proponent of the CDP and, and really using the CDP to guide our investments. And this project this initiative is something that's been in the CDP for many years. So shouldn't that kind of give this a little more priority in our thinking and our budgeting? And I'm curious from your perspective, because you are so involved with CDP, why would we push back on something that's been in the CDP and discussed for so many years? So I'd love your
pushing back
perspective.
on to me, it's a separation from the concept to the budget. I mean, should I talk about this now or wait till 3 o'clock? I mean, there are a lot of elements here, and I'll give you the short version now. We can talk more about it this afternoon if you want. It's very definitely in the CDP, but more than just this project is in there. I mean, the Canal Walk Park that is talked about in the CDP includes the area, all down from the eastern. Wait a minute. Hold on a minute. Yeah, south, all the way down. Down Canal Street as a park. So there's more to it than just this canal project. And it talks about being developed, the entire walk park being developed in cooperation with the Corps of Engineers and with the business community, with neighboring communities, with the state, to explore the development of a water taxi service as well. So yes, it's in there, but it's in there, and then one of the main things it talks about is a connection of our bike paths to this Canal Walk Park. So the park was more than just the dock. You know, it was truly to be a park at that side of town, and that's, you know, that's a wonderful goal. But I also got to tell you, there's another really big thing in the CDP from 2010 that gets talked about every so often and is yet to be realized, and that is the streetscape on Baltimore and Wilmington Avenue. One of our primary economic assets to the city that, frankly, is, even though they were both in the CDP, I think the work on the canal project really got started around 2011, whereas the recommendation of the Baltimore Avenue streetscape to follow with the Rehoboth Avenue streetscape came along in 2010 and has never been acted on. And so I just wonder, from a return on investment, would we be better off as a city? I don't mean better off. We want to have everything, right? We want to be able to have all of these assets. But right now, we have an asset that needs a great deal of work, and that's Baltimore and Wilmington Avenue, and the return it can provide to our business community as well as to the city is much greater than this. So, you know, we look at our capital funds and we see urgent, essential, and deferred. And I'm not necessarily suggesting deferred on this because it's been deferred. I'm suggesting it may not be urgent, and that perhaps we should let them continue fundraising with some either bid extension or doing it in 2 phases or whatever allows it to happen under the terms it's supposed to happen on, which is that no city funds would be expended for the construction. That has been the case from the beginning.
Yeah, and I apologize for kind of diverging from the pure talks about budget, but because of the time sensitivity to this and the need to, in the short term, whether we get the contractor to agree to extend the price for a period of time or not, is that this has to be handled with this budget if we're going to demonstrate that the city is truly partnering with the great work that the LRCIA has done in raising almost 1.1 million. And so I didn't intend for us to get into a big discussion about the priorities in the CDP and the other projects that are of equal or more important. But the immediate challenge that we face is how do we work together to get this contract awarded in a timely manner so that we can begin it and begin to realize the good work that has already been ongoing for years.
All right. If nobody has anything else to do, obviously we're going to speak to it at 3 o'clock.
I will defer my comments on the Canal Dock project to then. I just have one question for the city manager or Bert. In looking at the budget highlights, am I correct in seeing that there's we have revenues in excess of expenses by $96,000 and change?
That's right.
Okay.
You've had them over almost $1 million a lot of years.
So that $96,000 we could divert to additional capital outlays?
Well, truth be known, the general fund of the city for 25 years probably hadn't been in balance. It's the water and sewer funds that have provided the resources to fund the city.
Are you saying that 96,000 is our cash reserves for the following year?
No, I'm saying the 96,000, I'm expecting. And actually, last few years, general fund's done fairly well. But if you look at it historically, it's not, the $96,000 is a drop in the bucket compared to what we've experienced over the last.
But we still have about 13 million in cash reserves on a revolving basis, according to your last chart. Is that correct?
It's not reserves.
Well,
That's a
It
cash
is,
flow.
it is cash reserves. It's in the general fund. That's how it was
Cash flow.
presented.
Necessarily cash reserves.
It's
flow.
Yeah, what I'm really.
It is cash.
Your general fund.
I don't appreciate the last, I'm asking a question. I've run budgets for many years, and you presented it as reserves last year, in one of your charts. So tell me what it is. It's more than $96,000 that we have in
Talking
reserves.
about cash in the bank.
Yes.
I mean, basically, we have
Exactly.
our cash position. There's a chart that you'll
Yes,
see in
thank
your
you.
report that'll
Yes.
show you what our trash.
Cash position
But
is, yes.
I wouldn't get, just
Yes.
as a general comment about cash, that sounds like an impressive number because it has grown over recent years. But we're going to take on a new business model with this debt that you're going to have to serve. You're going to have $75 million worth of debt in a few years. So I think you kind of have to look at the financial statements in whole and not look at one particular line item on the financial.
So what is our reserves? What are our reserves? I mean, don't we have a
As of
reserve?
January 31st,
Okay.
we had a total cash balances of over $15 million. Now,
Okay.
most of that's restricted,
what I
a big
thought.
portion of it's
Yeah, I
restricted for
understand.
special purposes.
Yeah.
As far as your general fund reserves, they're not that substantial, really.
What's our general fund reserves roughly?
Oh, you're probably about $6-7 million,
Okay.
6, 7, 8 million.
Thank
is
you.
where it goes.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, Steve, let me just, if you don't mind finishing
no.
this thought. So I wasn't asking account cash balances or anything else. I'm talking about balancing the fiscal year 2021 budget. We still have $96,000 worth of revenue that we've not budgeted an expense for yet. Is that correct?
That's exactly right.
Okay, thank you.
So just to wrap up this part of the conversation here, Sharon, do you have what you need from us to do an assessment of what the impact would be if we decided to go forward with the contract and have to obligate the $280,000? Do you need more from us to kind of do that analysis, or?
An analysis of,
I mean, the very good question that Commissioner Gay asked of me and I had no good answer to, which is where would the $280K come from?
well, I'll go back to the drawing board on that. I mean, off the top of my head, I'd say the last two items that we put in, the LED lighting on Rehoboth Avenue, the $30,000 for the charging stations. So that's going to give us $235,000. Don't shoot the messenger. Maybe the chairs from the convention center would give us $265,000, or whatever. We can look
Maybe
for
we
other.
defer purchasing new trucks or lifts or other things, or electric vehicles on the boardwalk. So,
Yes.
there are a lot of other trade-offs other than what we've all as a consensus agreed we want in the budget.
Yeah, I don't think the trucks, we
So-
talked about that, or the equipment, but yeah, I was just using an example to come up in my head with 200, and I'm not saying that, yes, so.
If we do in fact vote to move forward with this, we'd be able to leave it in your hands to put something in front of us by the next budget session.
Certainly, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to, assuming that the contractor will not agree to extending the time period for his bid, I mean, I'm more optimistic about the success of the canal project than I am that a contractor will extend his bid. But the thing is, that we could, if we make the decision to go forward with the contract, that you'll have what you need to enable the contract to be fully funded.
So, first of all, I'd be cautious about asking anything of Thompson and Sons, the low bidder at this
Right.
point, because that bid is based on a lot of different factors, meaning what the contractor himself has in the pipeline, when he's starting the project. We have a tight timeline here for any work to be done in the summer, and we've noticed that and given that information out to the contractor that he can't work between this period of time and that period of time, or he has to work in the canal during that time. And the other thing is, yes, we can certainly remove, to come up with $280,000, remove items in the CIP, but in order to sign a contract before March 8th, I cannot do that as the city representative as the city manager unless I know that the funding is there completely.
Right.
Because the city is liable, obviously, I'm liable for that funding. And the contractor doesn't care, just wants to know somebody signed on the dotted line.
It's going to be a payment schedule and,
That's right.
yeah.
That's right. So, this conversation, I assume, is going to give you, maybe some clarity for 3 o'clock today to award the bid. But again, we haven't adopted the budget. That won't happen until March 20th.
Right.
Can you?
Mayor,
can-
excuse
I'm
me.
so- no, go
All
ahead.
right, just a question that may be totally unrelated, and if it's out of order, tell me. Did we conclude our discussion that we had a month or so ago about the consideration of selling the property at 84 Kent?
Still have that.
That's in there.
That's in the budget.
That's in this budget?
Yes.
So that revenue, around $800,000,
That's in the budget.
is in here? Okay.
Correct.
All right.
I just, isn't the city running the bid process? You're running the bid process, right? For the canal access?
Mr. Spong from Landscape Architect Design he'll be here at 3 o'clock to explain that. The city's
But
running.
he works for you, he's a consultant that works for the city?
Yes.
So why can't the city just, I just don't know the answers. Why can't the city, since we're running the process through a consultant, just ask the bidders if they would extend the bid to give the LRC, or to give the nonprofit more time to raise money? Why can't we just ask
I mean,
that question so we know that answer this afternoon?
I think we can ask Mark that, Matt that.
But he's a consultant.
Yeah.
I mean,
but
he's just a consultant.
I think he can ask that, but I think what we have to do, and especially what the city manager said, we have to be careful about the low bidder, because if you think about it, they put these bids in starting back in December, so they put their numbers together in December. Over year end to now, and I'm not exactly sure where all of their pieces of this puzzle are coming from, but I would imagine a lot of them are coming from China. And things between the United States and China are a little bit dicey right now, and I would imagine that a lot of his pieces are more expensive today than they were 3 months ago.
Well, and
I
not
think
only
that's what
that,
we have to-
logistically, his whole schedule from beginning to completion of this project is based on an award date that is before March 8th, which is the end of it. Any delay to that, it could be disruptive, because as the city manager said, he is incorporating this and integrating this into other projects that he has that are on a longer-term cycle. So the commitment of his own people, the commitment of subcontractors, the obtaining of all the materials to do it, the kind of the gap in when he can do work, whether he has a barge on the canal itself to be able to continue work, or whether there's a suspension of work during the peak season, and then continuing, beginning after Labor Day and going on to, and assuming good weather. And so there's a lot of unpredictable things that could impact the schedule. And so I'm no expert in construction contracting, but I do know enough from working with people who had a lot of experience that every day matters. And that begins with the award date.
And we do not meet again until after that critical date.
Right. And that's why I didn't want to, I wanted this beginning of this conversation about whether we agree to award the contract or not to happen this morning, so that this would all be at least
Because it has
out
to be
there.
part of the budget. Right.
Exactly, out there before we get into the, and
I
this
guess
will all help inform that decision.
The last question I would ask is, why were the bids sought before the money was obtained? If the idea was that we were not supposed to fund it.
That's not true. That we had almost $950,000 had been raised. The estimate was like $900,000 or $950,000.
I thought it was a little over $1 million, actually.
But the point is, they were really close. The surprise was when the city manager and her team opened up the bids and saw the price.
Well, that's often the way. So there was very little leeway between what they had, what the bids had to come in.
It sounds like this is more of a discussion for 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
With that in mind, Yeah, no, I know that. I just want to make sure the commissioners are done talking about this. And then we're done for the budget meeting. Any questions, please?
Oh, I see what you're saying for that time.
My name is, excuse me, Terry Eskew, 102 Henlopen Avenue. You know, I'm sitting here and I'm listening, and this is, I understand this is the budget meeting, but I'm listening, and, you know, for the last 20 minutes, we've all been sitting here after a long morning of talking about priorities. And one of the things that I'm hearing is, it sounds like the city is twisting itself into a pretzel, trying to accommodate a project. And it's almost like the tail is wagging the dog, because it's as if, and I understand, believe me, I think this is a beautiful, you know, representation of what this area could look like. But I almost feel like, you know, here we are accepting that this is a priority. We're twisting ourselves in terms of our budget as to, well, what can the city eliminate from this? Or what can we eliminate from this as a city on other priorities that we have? You know, as Sharon was just saying, things that we could eliminate. And I'm thinking, this is almost like the tail wagging the dog. Why don't we alter this vision and fit it into a budget, a specific budget that we have that works with our priorities, instead of just saying, oh yes, let's go whole hog, 100%, do this, this is their vision, and we have to twist ourselves around as a city budget to go into this. So why don't we let the dog wag the tail instead of the tail wagging the dog in terms of numbers? So, you know, I'm sure this isn't going to work into the time frame, but, you know, you're looking at it, like I said, a lovely, you know, representation, which was on the website, of what could be done. Why don't we scale this back and say, look, this is the money you get. What can you do with that money instead of the other way around? So that's what I wanted to present. The other thing I was going to show this afternoon is, this is what we're looking at right now. So I'm not saying we need to hurry on this or anything, but this is really a big disappointment that this is what it's looking like right now. And I just think that we need to do something to let the dog wag the tail instead of the other way around. Give them a budget, tell them to alter this, and this is the number that we feel comfortable with because we have other priorities, and see what they can do. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you.
That was an outstanding call.
Anybody, please?
Once again, Suzanne Good, 1 Grove Street, and I appreciate what Terry said. It's actually inspired me. Maybe you want to build, the Canal Boat Association wants to think about a $700,000 dock for private boats, I guess. I'm not a boater. I actually love the ocean, the beach. But my main problem is, it seems as if there was some consensus behind closed doors here before mid-September, when Sussex Tree was hired to execute what I view as a total rape of the embankment. You took dozens of mature trees. I was told by 2 people, one commissioner and one employee of City Hall, which seemed to be the company line, that there was an invasive species on that bank. Well, these were native trees to Delaware. They were beautiful, mature trees.
That's in the past.
Well, that was
this project,
$15,000 that was paid by taxpayer money to Sussex Tree. So it's as though in mid-September, someone here was confident that we could railroad this project through within a year, because as Terry has shown you, sadly, you have raped the land. So now we have to do something to restore it so it doesn't erode completely. So we spent $15,000 of our money on that was an estimate I've been given. I actually think it's an underestimate. That was a crew of 4 or 5 men. They were all men, 2 vehicles.
Please concentrate on the project itself,
I would
not
like
this.
to see you restore the embankment until you have the necessary funds for this project, and I'm saddened that you rape the land in this way in a town which espouses love of trees and mature tree canopy. Thank you.
Anybody else? If not, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you.